Yeah, all right. So let me explain what's going on with this new system. The board is a little bit funny. I was just writing on the left-hand one. I don't know about the right-hand one. Uh, Seems fine to me. Maybe you don't have permissions to write. I can give them to you.
Oh, I think maybe that
Oh,
means
yeah.
the keyboard.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with that. That's right. There's some error there. I don't know if there's an error in the console. I'll have a look.
Is it meant to, when you click on the board, is it meant to come up with the text? Because it's kind of, you got to read it in the world at the moment. So.
Yeah, that is what it's supposed to do eventually. It's not meant to do it yet.
Okay.
Okay, so here's the new. Uh, Maybe I'll use some of these boards over here to explain what's going on. So as of some number of weeks, there's been a feature where you could come in here and you could walk up to an orb and you could ask it a question and it would pipe that question through HTTP service, a Roblox service to GPT, and then GPT would respond, and then you would get these question and answer text boxes. What's new about what you see, what you've been seeing throughout this seminar, is that added into this is the ability to actually read the contents of a board and send that as part of the query to GPT. So the way that's now working is that, so if you have some boards, and it currently only works for these two boards that we've been looking at, not the ones I'm writing on, but the earlier ones. There's special keywords, left board and right board, and if you ask a question, so there's an ask a question prompt on the orb here, and if you ask a question and use those special terms in the question, what will happen is that it will take the contents of the board, it sends the board data, so that is just the data of all the points making up the lines, so there's thousands of lines that make up these shapes that you can see on the boards. It takes that data, it sends it as JSON to a server running on the Google Cloud. That then produces a PNG. That's using Matplotlib. That PNG is then passed to Google Vision API, which is an OCR API. I tried Tesseract, but Tesseract isn't actually very good at handwriting. Google Cloud Vision seems to be pretty good. That OCR text is then passed back to Roblox and then sent as part of the query. So it replaces left board in your query. So if you say, what is left board, then at this part here somewhere, left board is replaced by the OCR text, and then that's sent to GPT. And it seems to work pretty well. You've been seeing it operate during the seminar, for example. We can try it. Well, it hasn't. The queries return when they've got a lot of the kind of moderation in them. They tend not to appear very well. But let's see. Let's add to the list on right board, which is what I was doing earlier. So this is right board. This one here. And yeah. So there you go. So it found the list. It understood what the list was about. And then it passed that into GPT. GPT responded with that list that you see there.
So I'm wondering about framing. When you say add to the list on right board, it might actually be more appropriate to say add to the list right, add to the list right board or something like that.
That's right.
Like how is the substitution done? Is it putting quotes or something?
It puts quotes.
Like for example,
around
when you say summarize So when you say summarize left board, it says summarize, open quotation, give the OCR contents, and then close quotation. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, so the on is more or less just so it looks more sensible in native English on the question rather than actually making GPT read it correctly. That's right.
I wonder if that has any effect on the quality of the responses.
Yeah, it's interesting. It probably does. These systems are quite sensitive to some of this kind of preparation. So yeah, there's some experimentation that would be useful.
Right. In my mind, it's like my model of GPT-3 is kind of like mimicking its context, right? So it seems to me if you say something like add to the list on, and then you give a list, it might think in its way, oh, okay, I'm now in a context where this text is like from someone who is like slightly loose with the English language. And so, you know, they might think that it's appropriate to add words like on in places they don't quite belong or something like that. Like it might give you slightly confused responses because you've demonstrated that it's in a context where predicting slight confusion is appropriate.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm interested in comments like the one Chad just made. Elaborate on dangerous. Maybe I can elaborate. I think it's important to think about and try out these kinds of things. I'm not actually advocating necessarily that this should be pervasive, but it will be, regardless of what we choose to do. Oh, you meant it as a joke. Yeah, well, Matt made this point earlier when we were discussing something related, which is how much training data do we want to give to OpenAI anyway, right? All this querying is providing additional training data, sort of high quality, natural text into the system. How much of what is going on in our seminars do we want to exfiltrate? I mean, it's like a privacy question, right? Is this... I mean, that was part of the design of the orbs, right? Was to know who's listening when you're using voice chat. Well, who's reading the boards? There's a kind of presumption that it's whoever you can see in the server. Now it's persistent, right? So, and you know that, or at least you come to know it if you come here a few times. So the boards are public space. I don't think there's much expectation that if you write on the boards, it's going to remain secret. But does that mean it's okay to send it to OpenAI and potentially have it stored there for infinity and be part of training every future model? I don't know. On the other hand, well, beside it just being kind of cool and fun, there's a lot of value to be gained from integrating with these kinds of tools, right? We're just starting to explore it, but even just today, I could think of a couple of ways in which adding to these lists is kind of an interesting stimulus to the conversation. So those are fairly minor, but I can see ways in which, well, we were just discussing the role of AI tutors, right? And going forward, these technologies will get much, much better, and it's kind of a question of how much efficiency and potential for enlightenment and great conversation do you want to sacrifice in the name of keeping training data away from OpenAI? So I'm interested in feedback, positive and negative on that.
I was going to say that I did bring up that conversation in the Discord, but on the other hand, we are posting all of these recordings to YouTube, which is
right
itself providing a multimodal data source of human conversations, and everything that we say and do is recorded and posted for basically anyone to see with limited ability to know who is seeing it. So
yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Serious stuff aside, it's a lot of fun. Let me see if I can get something more interesting on the board over here. It's actually GPT-3 is not very good at jokes. ChatGPT is better. but GPT-3 is disappointing when it comes to telling jokes in general. But it's let me think of some more things to do while I explain some of the interesting aspects of how this was produced. So that's another fascinating part of the story. So I did this last night in the space of a couple of hours from scratch, and the process of writing all this code was a collaboration with ChatGPT, which is the next generation, maybe half generation after GPT-3. So ChatGPT, if you haven't been following on the Discord, is similar to the GPT-3 playground that you could have played with for months now, except that it's more of a chat interface. Obviously, you get a single chat box. It's better at remembering context and seems it's a similar system, not far beyond DaVinci 003, which is what we're interacting with when we ask these questions. But it does seem significantly more capable in a variety of directions, and code is one of them. So here's how this code was written. So I just, there's several ingredients. So I provided prompts like the following. Write a Python web server. Now that's kind of easy, right? Because you can just Google for that. Okay, but ChatGPT does that, and then I asked it to, I needed to process the board data, as you can see in that diagram earlier, right? So I pasted JSON from Billy's persistence implementation inside Metaboard, which, it's a list of lists of lists, or dictionaries, lists and dictionaries, with X and Y coordinates in them and colors. It's not that complicated, but still it would have taken me a few minutes to figure out how to index into it to get the point data and the lines and so on. But I didn't think about it at all. I just pasted the JSON in. Just like maybe 20 or 30 lines, enough to see an entire curve. I pasted it into ChatGPT and said, this is JSON data of lines made up of points. Turn it into, write a Python script that turns it into a PNG. Okay, that's all I told it. It correctly generated lines from that point data using Matplotlib, which I hadn't actually thought to use. I've used Matplotlib before, and if I had really thought about this problem, I probably would have ended up using Matplotlib, but I hadn't thought about it before. So it extracted the list of X and Y coordinates of the points, correctly passed it into plt.plot, and then did plt.savefig to save it to a PNG file. Completely correct, first try, except there was one unused variable, which is to do with a point that's actually pretty confusing in Matplotlib, whether you should use a figure or not when you're generating a plot. It made a figure that it didn't use. So after I pasted in the code and noticed that, I said to ChatGPT, I said, hey, this variable isn't used. And ChatGPT said, oh yes, you're right, and then generated code that had this removed, and so it fixed it.
Wow. I was going to say, I wouldn't use Matplotlib for this, and I was going to call you out for it, but it wasn't your choice. That's quite interesting.
Yeah, I guess it is. It's not a perfect fit for getting something working fast. It's perfectly good. Okay, that's the first part. So then there's the OCR part, right? So then I said the same thing. So I asked it. I said, write a Python script. Well, it was in the context of all the stuff that had gone before. So I just said something like, add to this OCR of the output PNG, something like that. Okay, so then it imported Tesseract, and I knew how to use it and got the text. Now again, a lot of this it's fairly routine, right? Or very routine. I would usually do this kind of thing by Googling and sticking together a bunch of things that I find. It's sort of low-level programming, but this was much faster than the way I would have usually done it, because I could it had this building context, right? So that it knew the variable names and got them correct, and everything plugged together correctly. And I mostly just had to copy paste and maybe edit a few things. Okay, so that got that right. That was about it. Then I plugged it in. So I was running this web server that was processing the JSON received from Roblox. So this is on Replit, just because it was convenient. But Tesseract sucks. So Tesseract doesn't actually do the recognition of handwriting very well at all. So that's actually most of the time. So this was like 30 minutes up to here. And then it was basically working, in the sense that the pipes were connected. But the OCR was insufficient to actually send to GPT-3 and get any interesting responses. So then the rest of the time, like an hour and a half, was just spent fiddling around with Google Cloud, getting the virtual machine to, set up the right firewall rules and attach an external IP address and then deal with the startup scripts and, the usual kind of bullshit that goes with running anything on a cloud. So the Google Cloud Vision API is another deep learning API. I assume Tesseract is. I can't imagine there's an OCR library in 2022 that isn't deep learning based, but maybe it's not. But the Google Cloud Vision API is much better at handwriting. So yeah, what you see here is the result of all that. But even in the Google Cloud part, I was asking ChatGPT questions because their help is so useless. I would say something like, how do you do X in Google Cloud? And of course it's read the documentation for Google Cloud and gives a better answer than searching Google's docs, which is terrifying for Google, you'd have to assume. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I asked it for the server API setup. So I was pretty amazed. I've been playing with these tools as a pretty early adopter, but the experience last night of writing this code was qualitatively different from my previous interactions with AI systems. This feels to me like the first AI product. I mean, Dolly is fun, but this, I will not program without this anymore. At least many kinds of programming. This kind of glue programming is like really tedious, and it's very good at it.
Yeah, there are obviously more kinds of programming. Like
Yes.
for a very stark contrast, instead of building like a AAA game or something like that.
Or even just writing metaboard. Right, so the metaboard library is not the kind of thing I would expect that GPT is going to be writing anytime soon, right? It's like a I don't know how to describe it exactly, but all the things that ChatGPT was doing for me is like it's got a very good memory, right? It just knows all the Python libraries. It knows how they work. It knows how they fit together. It knows changes in the APIs. That was another interesting part. So part of the code it gave me didn't work correctly, and then I pasted the error. Russell, stop that! Russell! I pasted the error into ChatGPT, and what it said was, oh yeah, they must have changed the API. It literally said, they must have changed the API. You should do this instead now. And its suggestion worked. So it's this is the kind of conversation you have with people when you're writing code, right? Like plugging together libraries, and it's like, okay, this library must have changed its API. So it felt very much like a conversation I'd be having with someone in Discord if I was programming with them on something. It was very interesting. Yeah.
So I imagine, is there a facility to let's say I make a new library for Python that's sort of substantial, and its documentation is online, but it wasn't in the data set when this model was trained. Right. Could someone load the documentation from my library into ChatGPT and basically say, hey, go read this documentation and then tell me how to do this with it?
Yeah, that's right. You can fine-tune. ChatGPT hasn't been released with an API, but you can fine-tune GPT-3 in that way. So you can provide additional text and then run it for some number of epochs on that text. So yeah, I'm actually considering doing that. One of the things I want to experiment with is fine-tuning a GPT model on relevant seminar texts, like take Watanabe's book or say Adam's books and the other Rethink X reports, grab the text, fine-tune a GPT-3 model on them, I mean with permission, I guess, and then that would, I mean, it's probably read some of those and it's actually familiar with some of the stuff Rethink X has done from querying it, but that would kind of bring it to its attention, I suppose. Yeah, I don't know how effective that is. So it's maybe not a completely solved problem to bring to its attention updates on sort of smaller pieces of text compared to the internet.
Well, I'm sure it's only a matter of time before there's like a continuous stream of models that you can access through this API that are being constantly updated with new data.
What are you saying, Billy? LMG Pitify. Okay.
Maybe this is a tool. Billy was asking earlier if it's possible to go from stroke data to OCR, like text directly rather than going through an image. Which actually, you know, there's slightly more data in strokes than an image, because you've got the order, which, you know, it's sensible that watching someone oh, okay. Let me Google that for you. That's right.
I see. Yeah, I don't know about
I was
going
reading
directly from board data.
Image to file or something like that.
I see. Yeah, all right. Let me see if there's anything else about that experience that's worth communicating. Yeah, I've interacted with ChatGPT a fair bit now. It's clearly much more competent at code than anything else I've pointed it at, which I suppose isn't surprising, maybe. So interacting with it on the topic.
It's interesting to me that it gets the...
Mhm.
Sorry, I was going to say, it's interesting to me when you said, oh, they must have changed the API, because that really, like, this mode of interaction you were having with it is obviously like a chat, but also it's not like there were chats. It's not like there was like a large number of chats in the like dialogues in the training data if it was just a generic web data set, right? So it's learned how to kind of, that's a very natural way, even using the word O, right? Or if it used the word O, I don't know, but they must have changed the APIs. Like, still, this is obviously emerged because, like, if it was trained on code, it wasn't trained on dialogues transcribed from pair programming sessions, right?
No.
So this is interesting to me that's
yeah, it's definitely emergent from its just general familiarity with human dialogue together with its understanding of code. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I have to say that I've kind of had these chats with GPT-3 a fair bit, but never really pursued it in any like lengthy way, because it just didn't feel like there was someone on the other end of the phone, to put it metaphorically. So I was putting in prompts and getting responses, but okay, even when the context window of GPT-3 was sufficient to have our whole conversation in it, it kind of felt like you were talking to someone who wasn't really there, like they were kind of distracted, but these chat sessions with ChatGPT, partly because they're focused on a problem, which I'm kind of, I'm focused on solving, and it's helping me make progress on that. But the sense of there being another entity on the other end of the line was unmistakable. I mean, obviously it's to some degree an illusion. How much of an illusion it is up for debate. But I haven't had that feeling before interacting with any of these systems. Like the sense that I could do something like paste in an error and then say, what's up with that? And it will tell me, right? It understands that error message and knows what causes it in a way that sometimes, I mean, often, like everybody, I Google error messages, right? You copy the error message, you paste it into Google, you go, okay, what's up with this? It's much better than that. So these error messages I was giving to it, Googling didn't help. So I don't know where it got that understanding of the library change. Obviously, it's on some Stack Exchange post that probably didn't surface in my Google search. So I don't know what degree of like true deep understanding to ascribe to the system, but it's just extremely broad knowledge and its ability to surface these things in a way that is useful at a given moment is, yeah, it's really quite amazing.
So I'm imagining two things two images that remark evoked for me. Is one of them, imagine sharing your screen on a Zoom call with a automatically generated avatar that is reading, what this technology, fundamental underlying technology, is telling it to say, and then it's actually like, it would be much more like having a conversation with this thing. I imagine that's like not too much harder once you've got the kind of underlying coherence. And the other thing is, why have a compiler? Like the compiler's error message is meant to kind of tell you there's a problem here, but it's always working at a very low level, which is, this argument to this function is of the wrong type. Whereas there must have been an API update, is taking into account the context of the library that you're using, the fact that, for example, this code came from some online source, with some third-party package that maybe regularly updates its API. That's the kind of thing that happens with third-party packages. So, I can imagine a system where this is integrated into the programming tools that you're using. So you end up, instead of getting a technical error message, or maybe optionally as an alternative to a technical error message, or maybe adjacent to it, you end up with some kind of commentary that has come from this system that can take into account more context. And it would be a much better error message because it would be sort of more informative and more helpful, which some tools already try to do. Like, for example, the Rust compiler has some pretty helpful suggestions that come along with its error messages, and it appears quite intelligent at sort of telling you, oh, did you mean to do this? But yeah, maybe even more is possible.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I got the strong feeling interacting with ChatGPT last night that, it felt like browsing the internet for the first time, or some of these other experiences I've had with tech, where you just kind of start, your mind is kind of turning over with things that might be possible. And I'm not, of course, we've talked plenty about AGI and how all that will work, and many things will change. But just in the very near term, so I'm talking like the next year, I could imagine seeing a transition in the way we interact with information. There's been in my life several epochs of with different predominant modes of interacting with information, right? So from the before internet era to the post Google era, where basically information exists insofar as Google can find it. And it feels like a new kind of mode of interacting with information, right? Where you have this, between you and all human knowledge is this entity that actually understands to some extent what you're trying to achieve, and is sort of standing in between you and all of that. Yeah, so I'm interested to see the extent. I don't know how we're going to use it here, but I can imagine, just the kind of things we were doing today, where you're just kind of asking it to have a contrarian take on something. It's just like a background kind of process that is like one of the things with seminars is it's actually quite difficult to have high quality thoughts in real time, right? It's much easier to go away, think about it, and then kind of see, okay, actually the thing we should have then talked about was X. So the difference between a kind of wandering seminar that doesn't actually really surface any new insights and is therefore maybe a bit blah, and a seminar that really feels like you're ticking along and kind of getting somewhere. Um, it's a kind of a small difference, and I can imagine some of these technologies just really putting a hand on the scales and tipping it over into being much better, right? Just like, oh, we missed that, right? Nobody thought of that particular observation. It's so great that we had the AI there to just kind of pick up the slack a little bit or push us in this direction. It's easier with disruption than the technical seminars, but I'm hoping that, say, fine-tuning on, say with SLT, fine-tuning on Watanabe's like papers, maybe like one can fine-tune on FAQs that are handwritten, like if AI tutors are a big part of the future, then managing their data is a big form of what teaching becomes, right? It's not just read the internet. Maybe there's more to it than that. So I'm kind of interested to explore that.
Fine-tuning their data. Eventually, this is going to merge with like training, as in
That's right.
occupational training.
That's right.
These
Yeah.
models will just be like, come on,
Yeah.
ChatGPT, I just really need you to pay attention to this.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I think, but you just have to do it once. Just do a really good job training that that one entity. Yeah. All right. I guess we'll wrap up. Any final comments people want to make? It failed to make a decent poem. Maybe next time. Okay. Yeah. Thanks everyone. That was fun. So I'll see you all later.